everyone, so this video is a long time coming. As you can see, those little dangling feet are Audrey's, and we have moved twice since this footage, and I have set up 4 sewing rooms since, but that is besides the point. I just want to let you know in case you notice the difference in the sewing rooms. I'm also, disclaimer, nursing Henry right now, so if you hear some sweet baby noises in the background, that is why, and Audrey is playing. I've started this voiceover like 10 times, and it is me, myself, and I most days, so we're just gonna have to muscle through. Anywho, this is how I make a completely smocked, sleeveless dress using the Children's Corner Jamie pattern as a guide. Shh, Audrey. But really, you can use whatever bodice pattern that you have as a guide. I just happen to have the Children's Corner Jamie pattern, and I really like the fit of it, and I love it as a pattern, and I have a whole blog post about it that I will link below if you want to read it. So first, I ripped 2 pieces of fabric to my desired length. Now, you'll have to decide this based on your little one's dimensions and then how you're hemming your dress. If you are hemming with a deep hem using your fabric, account for that. If you're attaching lace or trim instead, just whatever you're doing, think about it, and that's how you'll decide the length of your dress. So from there, I folded each fabric panel in half and then in half again, and going over this with an iron gives me iron marks at the quarter and middle marks, which those can be helpful when blocking, so I like to just do this step. Now, the width of your fabric panels also depends on the size that you're making, obviously, and your personal preference and the fabric that you're working with, but generally a good rule of thumb for most batiste weights is about 3 times the finished width, so you will make it 3 times wider than what you want your finished width dimension to be, if that makes sense. We don't put pencil on Henry's head. So then I roll each fabric up on my dowel just one at a time, and it's always good when the fabric comes out parallel to your dowel like this. You don't want it crooked. Start over if you're just not parallel. It won't get any better going through the pleater. Then I place a needle in every hole space and pleated up those panels, but again, whatever your pleating design, whatever your size, put needles as it makes sense for your work. And then I'm rolling up one of those panels on my dowel, sending that through my pleater, and then I rolled the second one up on my dowel, and again through the pleater it went. You just want to take your time here. Let your pleater do the work for you. Do not pull or anything like that, since you don't want your fabric to get out of whack and look like a hot mess. So make sure to pull plenty of thread before you cut your pleated works loose from your pleater. Then I tied the threads into groups of 2s or 3s down one side of the panel. It doesn't matter what side, you just pick a side and tie them down that side. Then I'm pulling all those pleats to that side and then cutting the threads so the 2 pieces of fabric are separate. Again, tying only down one side in groups of 2s. Just doing one side keeps those threads secure, but it also allows you to block using the other side. So you don't have to worry about your threads coming loose, but you can still block, is what I'm trying to say. Then I blocked this garment using the CC Jamie pattern, but like I said, you can use whatever bodice pattern you like, whatever one you have on hand, or whatever's your favorite. You get my drift. It's sewing, you do you. You just want to make sure that this entire armhole is in your pattern. So you don't want to use a yoke pattern here. You want that little notch area at the bottom of the armhole. I hope that is making sense, because it's very, very important. And I am using this freezer paper in the blocking process. If you don't have freezer paper, stop this video, pause me, and go get you some. Trust me, you want this, you need it. I got mine off of Amazon. It is linked below, but others have told me that they found it at Walmart. Whatevs, just go get you some. I love this stuff, if you can't tell. So I folded the back pattern piece so the facing is out of the way, and it just starts at the lap section, since you don't need all that facing. And then I traced the pattern piece onto the freezer paper. So to make everything neat, first I pull all of the pleats taut, all to one side. This just helps kind of reset, give a fresh start when blocking things, at least in my opinion. And then I find the middle of my fabric using that iron crease from before. Audrey, we weren't going to jump, sweetie. We had to be quiet. Yes. And I pull my threads up around that middle pleat. So basically what's happening here is I need to cut a placket down the back of the dress. And I don't want to cut through my pleating threads just yet and lose all those pleats. That would be a hot mess, and it would be a headache. So I'm pulling those threads up and out of the way. So after cutting all of those threads, then I tie just one side, the left side in my case, since I already have the other side or the right hand side of the bodice threads tied, oh yay, into groups of 2s. I hope all this is making sense. Hopefully the visual is helping you. And then very carefully I cut down the center back so a placket can be created, and I cut just slightly past those pleats. And then I cut the back bodice freezer paper pattern in half. Out there, sweetie. You eat yogurt out there. I first just pinned the back right bodice, concentrating only on the width dimension. I am merely just trying to get the same width as the freezer paper pattern. That's all I'm concentrating on. And I'm pulling each pleating thread to make sure that it's taut. Once it's the same width, then I tie those threads into groups of 2s. And then you can focus on getting the pleats evenly distributed. See what I'm doing? I first got it the width the way you want it, and now you can distribute the pleats. It's just the easiest method for me. I am so sorry about all this background noise. Then you can position your freezer paper pattern piece with the waxy side down on your fabric. Simply iron over the freezer paper and it'll adhere to your fabric, yeah Henry, and let the freezer paper fabric combo cool before moving it. You don't want to move it when it's warm. Then I took the assembly to my sewing machine and ran a very tightish zigzag around the neckline and armholes sides of the freezer paper. Your goal here is to go through each pleat at least once to anchor everything down. And it is okay if you sew onto the freezer paper, it'll just tear loose from those stitches later on. Yeah, Henry. Then I repeated the same blocking freezer paper zigzag for the front of the dress, all that lovely jazz we just went over. Do the same thing for the front of the dress. It'll be easier since you don't need to have a placket, which is why I went into more detail on the back of the dress. So, next I sewed the dress together at the shoulder seams, and I ran a zigzag over each side of those shoulder seams, although you could bind... Hold on, we have a diaper change. Can you give me a diaper, please? Thank you. I am never going to get through this voiceover. Oh, where was I? Although you could bind the seams raw edges with some bonding tape or something like that, it is sewing, you do you. I just went over with a zigzag since it was easy and it gave some sort of a finish to that edge. But it was too bulky to do a French seam, is what I'm trying to get at. So then I removed all the freezer paper. Yeah, Henry. So, because I like to smock on an as complete of a garment as possible, and in this case, this is as complete as it gets. Well, I mean, kind of. Technically, you could continue with the machine sewing, but just don't trim up any of those seams since you risk cutting through the pleated thread in the process, which would be a hot mess. So, I'm going to stop here, and I went ahead and did my smocking. So when I was doing the smocking, we had moved twice, and Audrey is now 2 years old, and the original binding that I'd cut and matched this stuff, well, who knows where it went. So I ordered this Liberty of London instead. It's a great way to use a tiny bit of the fabric since this stuff is so expensive. So I ordered half a yard due to the bias bands, but I have plenty left over for a bodice top. You could just, pair it with whatever skirt, and you could have you another outfit with using Liberty of London. So I cut 2-inch wide bias bands to use around the neckline and armholes, and then I ripped 4-inch wide strips, yeah Henry, to the hem, or should I say Audrey ripped them. First I finished the placket, and I have 2 methods on how to do this that are both linked below. Then I folded a bias band in half and gave it an ironing, and I trimmed the knots off for those pleating threads, and then I sewed the bias band onto the neckline. Just make sure to leave about 1/2 inch of overhang on each side of the neckline for that bias band. And then I trim up that seam just enough so the band can fold over and meet those machine stitches. And I will use these machine stitches later on to sew the binding down by hand. And after I repeat the same method to the armholes, then I fold the binding over onto those armholes so that I can sew the side seams together using French seams. And I have a detailed video on French seams that I will link below. So if you're going to self-hem the dress, then go ahead and do the other French side seam and hem away. However, if you're going to use some lace or trim, go ahead and attach that now. I'm using this 4-inch wide piece of Liberty of London, and first I sew it to the dress with right sides together. Then I press that seam towards the Liberty of London, and next I iron the bottom edge about 1/2 inch under, and finally iron that edge to the machine stitches. And then once again I will use these machine stitches to hand sew the folded edge into place. Yeah, Henry, into place later on. Once I did all of the hand sewing and I added snaps to the back of the dress, I had this completed garment. I think that it is quite precious looking and a great way to use Liberty of London, since you can kind of just sprinkle some on the garment and have enough for a bodice for another dress, which is just a great use of your money. And if y'all are still with me, I know this voiceover was a hot mess, but I do hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, y'all, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.